Hey there. Today what I'm going to do is talk about the thyroid gland, its product, thyroid hormone, what effect thyroid hormone has on the cells of the body, and what happens if you have too little or too much thyroid hormone circulating around in the blood. So first off, this is the thyroid gland right there, and let's orient ourselves a little bit. This structure is part of the larynx, and the larynx is your voice box, and you can actually palpate this. This is on the front upper part of your neck, the superior anterior portion of your neck, and you have these two flat plates of cartilage called the thyroid cartilages that you can palpate. You can take your thumb and your pointer finger and palpate those two flat plates of cartilage. Then descending down from there, you have your windpipe or your trachea, and you can palpate that as well. You can run your fingers up and down that, and you'll feel these cartilage rings that are running horizontally around it. Now what the thyroid gland is going to do is the thyroid gland is basically going to wrap around the upper part of the trachea there. You have these two lobes of the thyroid gland that wraps around the upper part of the trachea right below the larynx. So what does the thyroid gland do? Well, the thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, and there's two different forms of that. There's T4 and T3. And what thyroid hormone is going to do is it's going to act on the cells of the body, and it's going to stimulate them to produce ATP. And that occurs through a process called cellular respiration. Now, why is it important that the cells produce ATP? What is ATP? Well, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. And all cells of the body, all living units, and the cells are the smallest living functional unit, all living units require chemical energy to power their activities. And the form that this chemical energy is going to take for the cells to be able to use is ATP. So thyroid hormone is going to act on the cells of the body, and it's going to cause them to produce ATP. Next, let's write out the equation for cellular respiration. What's the equation for cellular respiration? The equation is C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen molecules is going to make 6 CO2s, 6 waters, about 38 ATP molecules, and what else is produced here? We also produce heat. And it's this heat that's keeping our body temperatures both elevated and constant. The reason we can maintain our body temperatures at about 37 degrees Celsius all throughout the day is because thyroid hormone is acting on the cells of the body, stimulating cellular respiration, and heat is being produced in that process. It's that heat from cellular respiration that's keeping our body temperatures both elevated and constant. Now, the benefit of having our body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius all day at this elevated body temperature is that we can remain active all day. The enzymes are working relatively quickly at this elevated temperature, and that allows us to perform work and stay active all throughout the day. The downside of that is that it's very energetically costly. And what I mean by that is that we have to have a constant supply of nutrients either circulating around in the blood or stored in energy reserves to be able to fuel cellular respiration to keep that body heat elevated, keep that body temperature elevated. Now, if you're a snake or a lizard or some other type of ectotherm, then you are not able to regulate your body temperature on your own. In fact, your body temperature is regulated by the external environment, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. A disadvantage is that if it's cold outside, then your body temperature is cold and you're not able to be very active. You're not able to go out and seek food, to seek reproduction, and do all those sorts of things. An advantage, however, is that you don't require that constant supply of nutrients within the body to keep cellular respiration going. And what that allows is, if you're a lizard or a snake, then you can eat a meal, and if it's big enough, then you may not have to eat for a couple days, a couple weeks. If you're a python and you just ate a gazelle, you may not have to eat for a few months. And that's because you're not using that energy to maintain body heat. You can use it for other things. So let's recap this equation here. We have C6H12O6, which is what? What molecule is that? That's glucose. So glucose is going to combine with oxygen, and it's going to form a few products. It's going to produce carbon dioxide. It's going to produce water. It's going to produce about 38 ATP molecules, and also the heat that we just talked about. So basically what we're doing is we're taking glucose and we're utilizing the energy in those bonds, and we're converting that to a form that we can use. Specifically, we're converting that to ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, what happens if you have too little or too much thyroid hormone circulating around in the blood? Let's start with too little, which is called hypothyroidism. Hypo means below. So hypothyroidism means that we're not producing enough thyroid hormone. There's too little thyroid hormone circulating around in the blood. And this can be caused by, numerous different things. One, it can be congenital, which means you're just born with that condition. You can have radiation damage. Maybe you had to remove it for a surgery. You could have a viral infection, maybe an autoimmune disease. Or you could also have damage to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland sits at the base of the brain, and what it does is it produces a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the thyroid gland and stimulates the production of thyroid hormone. So if you have damage to this pituitary gland and your TSH levels go down, that means that your circulating levels of thyroid hormone are also going to go down. Now let's look at these symptoms. Mental fatigue, lethargy, feeling physically sluggish, weight gain, feeling cold. What I'd like to do with each of these symptoms is specifically talk about why each of these symptoms is occurring. And we can do that by looking at the equation for cellular respiration. Now, if our levels of thyroid hormone are down, that means that cellular respiration is down, and that means that the cells are not utilizing as much glucose, which means that we're producing less CO2, we're producing less H2O, we're producing less ATP, and we're also producing less heat. So what about this first condition here? Mental fatigue. Well, mental fatigue, that's something that's going on with the central nervous system. That's affecting the brain. And the brain, like every other cell in the body, requires ATP to perform to perform its job. And in fact, the brain is highly glucose dependent. And if you don't have thyroid hormones circulating around or not enough of it, then the neurons in the brain are not going to be able to utilize that glucose. And as a result, you're not producing as much ATP. And if you're not producing as much ATP, then your brain is not able to do the jobs it needs to do. And that can result in mental fatigue. What about lethargy? Feeling physically sluggish. This goes along those same lines. This has to do with your skeletal muscle cells. Your skeletal muscle cells need ATP to be able to contract. And if you're not producing enough ATP, then they're not able to do that job, and that's going to result in you feeling lethargic, physically sluggish. What about weight gain? Why would hypothyroidism result in weight gain? Well, if you're not stimulating cellular respiration, that means that the cells are not using as much glucose as they should. So that's going to cause the amount of glucose in your blood to go up. And what are you going to do with that glucose? You're going to store it. You can store it as glycogen, and you can also convert it as fat. So if the cells are not breaking down glucose, then the body is going to try to store that, any way it can. And it's going to store that as glycogen and fat, and that's going to result in weight gain. Lastly, feeling cold. Why would hypothyroidism result in feeling cold? We can just go down back here to the equation. And along those same lines, if cellular respiration is going down, then you're not producing as much heat. And if you're not producing as much heat, then you're going to feel cold. Now, let's move on to the converse scenario where we have too much thyroid hormone circulating around in the blood. We have hyperthyroidism. So now we'll focus on hyperthyroidism. And hyper means above, so these are elevated levels of thyroid hormone circulating around in the blood. The most common cause of this is a disease called Graves' disease, and this is an autoimmune disease that causes overactivity of the thyroid gland, so you're just producing too much thyroid hormone. And it can result in this exophthalmia, or these puffy eyes here. But it also has these other symptoms: weight loss, sweating, excessive hunger. And so let's try to assign all of these symptoms to their specific causes. And again, we can simply look at the equation down here and see what's going on. So with hyperthyroidism, we have elevated levels of thyroid hormone in the blood. So what does that do to cellular respiration? It stimulates it. So the body's going to use increased amounts of glucose. It's going to produce increased amounts of CO2, increased amounts of water, increased amounts of ATP, and increased amounts of heat. So knowing that, let's go through all these symptoms. What about weight loss? Why would hyperthyroidism cause weight loss? Well, you're stimulating cellular respiration, so your cells are using a lot more glucose than they normally do. And so not only are you using glucose in the blood, but maybe you're taking those glycogen reserves in the liver and the skeletal muscles, breaking those down into glucose to be able to fuel cellular respiration. Maybe you're going to start breaking down the fat reserves and converting those back to glucose to use for cellular respiration. So you're basically going through your energy reserves in the body, and that's causing weight loss. What about sweating? Why would you sweat? Why does the body sweat? The body sweats to get rid of heat. So why would we want to get rid of heat? Well, if you're stimulating cellular respiration more than it should, then you're producing excess amounts of heat, and that's elevating the body temperature above the homeostatic limits, above 37 degrees Celsius. And so the body's response to that is to try to get rid of that excess heat, and one of the ways it does it is by sweating. And lastly, what about excessive hunger? Why would you feel hungry? Well, that goes along those same lines that the cells are using all of this glucose. They're demanding all of this glucose because cellular respiration is being stimulated. And so the cells are saying that signal is being sent to the brain that's saying the cells need more sugar, they need more fuel, and the brain in response gives you the sensation of being hungry. So you'll go and eat, try to get those nutrients into the blood so you can facilitate these elevated rates of cellular respiration.